The ticking of the compass needle echoed in his ears like a metronome counting down to execution. Staff Sergeant Ellington Rhodes pressed his body deeper into the volcanic soil, the unforgiving black granules digging into his sweat-soaked utilities as Japanese voices drifted through the humid air just 15 yards ahead. 6 enemy tanks, squat, angular Type 95s with their distinctive 37mm guns, had stopped in a perfect line along the narrow jungle road, their commanders conferring in the growing twilight of June 14, 1944. The air hung thick with diesel fumes and the metallic scent of hot steel, mixing with the ever-present jungle rot and the coppery tang of fear that seemed to cling to every Marine who had spent more than a week on this godforsaken island. Rhodes felt rather than saw the 19 Marines of his scout sniper section spread through the underbrush around him. They were outnumbered and outgunned, caught behind enemy lines during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission on Saipan. None of them had expected to encounter the tank column that now blocked their only path back to the American lines. The Japanese tank commander shouted something, and Rhodes watched through his binoculars as the man jabbed a finger at a map, then pointed west, directly toward the unsuspecting Marines of the 2nd Division who were establishing defensive positions for the night. The man's voice carried an unmistakable tone of confidence. Rhodes had heard that sound enough times during the Pacific Campaign to know what it meant. The Japanese believed they had found a weakness in the American lines, a soft spot where their armored thrust could split the Marine divisions and drive them back into the sea. In his hand, Rhodes clutched the broken compass he'd carried since Guadalcanal. The glass face was cracked, and the needle didn't point north anymore. Instead, it faithfully followed any substantial metal object nearby. The damage had occurred during a Japanese mortar barrage that had killed 3 of his squad mates. A fragment had struck his pack, narrowly missing his spine but destroying most of his equipment. Most men would have discarded such a damaged tool. But Rhodes wasn't most men. Growing up in North Carolina, where the slightest deviation from expectation could mean danger for a black man, he'd learned to see opportunity where others saw only broken things. The compass had become his personal reminder that even damaged instruments could find a new purpose if you understood how they actually worked, rather than how they were supposed to work. His fingers traced the crack in the glass as he assessed the situation. The tanks were halted for now, but once they resumed their movement, his small team would be hopelessly exposed. They couldn't retreat without risking detection, couldn't advance without confronting the enemy directly, and had no weapons capable of disabling Japanese armor. Yet somewhere in this impossible scenario, Rhodes sensed an opportunity forming, nebulous at first, then crystallizing around the peculiar properties of his broken compass and the tactical vulnerability of the Japanese column. No one in the 4th Marine Division knew that one man's defiance of conventional wisdom that muggy evening would rewrite the rules of jungle warfare and save hundreds of American lives before the night was through. No one could have predicted that a damaged compass in the hands of a Marine the Corps had initially been reluctant to accept would become the fulcrum upon which the battle for Saipan would pivot. But then again, the story of Ellington Rhodes had always been one of defying expectations and finding paths where others saw only barriers. Ellington Rhodes was born in Durham, North Carolina in 1917, the eldest son of a railway porter and a schoolteacher. His father, James Rhodes, had served briefly in the Great War, returning with stories of the Harlem Hellfighters that ignited young Ellington's imagination. The Rhodes household was strict but loving. James instilled in his children a deep respect for education, hard work, and dignified conduct in a society that often expected the worst from them. Durham in the 1920s was a paradox for African Americans, home to successful black-owned businesses like the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, yet still firmly under the grip of Jim Crow segregation and the ever-present threat of racial violence. My father used to say, Excellence is the one language everyone understands, regardless of what they think about the color of your skin, Rhodes would later recount to a war correspondent. He taught me that I'd need to be twice as good to get half as far, but that the effort would forge a strength others might never know. These weren't merely words in the Rhodes household, they were the foundation of daily life. James would bring home discarded books from the white schools where he sometimes worked as a janitor during the summer months, building a modest but impressive library that covered subjects from classical literature to advanced mathematics. The family lived in Hayti, Durham's thriving black district, where Ellington witnessed both the possibilities and limitations facing African Americans during that era. Their modest home sat just 3 blocks from the Mechanics and Farmers Bank, one of the strongest black-owned financial institutions in the South. Yet each day, Ellington walked past stores where he wasn't allowed to try on clothes and restaurants where he couldn't be served. These contradictions shaped his worldview, teaching him to recognize opportunity within constraint and to navigate systems not designed for his success. Rhodes excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and sciences, showing an uncanny ability to solve problems that stumped his teachers. By the 6th grade, he was helping high school students with their algebra homework. His mother, Elizabeth, a graduate of Hampton Institute, fostered this talent, spending hours at the kitchen table working through equations and puzzles with her son. "Mathematics is beautiful," she would tell him, "because it doesn't care about your name or your face, only the elegance of your solution." He was also a natural hunter, learning woodland skills from his maternal grandfather, a former slave who had become something of a local legend for his ability to track game through the most tangled Carolina forests. Weekends and summer breaks often found young Ellington trailing behind the old man through pine woods and swampland, absorbing lessons in patience, observation, and the subtle language of the natural world. My granddaddy could look at a broken twig and tell you not just what kind of animal passed by, but how long ago, how heavy it was, and whether it was injured, Rhodes once said. He'd tap his temple and say, "The eyes only see what the mind is prepared to understand." I took that to heart. These tracking expeditions taught Rhodes more than wilderness skills. They instilled in him an approach to problem-solving that emphasized working with the environment rather than against it, and finding advantages in terrain that others might overlook. By his mid-teens, Ellington had developed a reputation as the finest young marksman in the county, regularly bringing home squirrels, rabbits, and the occasional deer to supplement the family's diet during the lean years of the Depression. He could fashion snares from found materials, navigate by stars when clouds obscured the moon, and move through dense underbrush without disturbing so much as a leaf. These were skills that would later serve him well in the jungles of the Pacific, though at the time they seemed merely practical necessities of rural Southern life. His high school years coincided with the worst of the Great Depression. The economic collapse hit Durham's black community particularly hard, as white employers often fired black workers first when cutting costs. The Rhodes family managed better than most, with Elizabeth's teaching position providing a modest but steady income. Still, sacrifices were necessary. Ellington took odd jobs after school and on weekends, contributing his earnings to the household while maintaining his position at the top of his class. After graduating at the top of his class in 1935, Rhodes found limited opportunities in the segregated South. He had hoped to attend North Carolina College, now North Carolina Central University, but even with his excellent grades, the family couldn't afford the tuition. He worked a series of jobs: factory hand, delivery driver, night watchman, while taking correspondence courses in engineering. The frustration of seeing less capable white students advance to college while he remained trapped in menial positions never hardened into bitterness. But it did strengthen his resolve to find alternative paths forward. By 1940, Rhodes had secured a position as a machinist's assistant at a Durham factory, one of the few skilled trades open to black workers in the area. The owner, a northern transplant less bound by southern racial customs, recognized Rhodes's mechanical aptitude and mathematical precision. Though paid less than white workers with similar responsibilities, Rhodes absorbed every aspect of the machinery he maintained, developing an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that would later inform his approach to weapons and tactical problems. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, Rhodes was working at this factory, which would soon convert to war production. The next morning, he stood outside the Marine Corps recruiting office in Durham, only to be told that the Marine Corps doesn't take colored. The recruiter suggested he try the Army, which had segregated units, or the Navy, which accepted black sailors but typically restricted them to mess steward duties. Like many African Americans, Rhodes saw the war as both a patriotic duty and a potential path to greater equality. What he didn't know was that the Marine Corps, the branch he admired most for its discipline and fighting reputation, had never accepted black recruits. Not a single African American had served as a Marine since the American Revolution, when a handful of free blacks had fought alongside white Marines. That changed on June 25, 1941, when President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, prohibiting racial discrimination in the defense industry and federal government, including the armed forces. The Marine Corps, the last service branch to integrate, began reluctantly accepting black recruits in 1942. Rhodes, who had continued to inquire at the recruiting office every few weeks, was among the first wave of black men to report to Montford Point, a segregated training facility established near Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. "They didn't want us there, that was plain as day," Rhodes later wrote in a letter home. "The drill instructors worked us twice as hard as the white recruits across the way. But there was a fire in us they couldn't extinguish. Every insult, every extra mile we ran, every obstacle they threw in our path just hardened our resolve to prove ourselves." The Montford Point Marines faced brutal conditions. Their training camp was hastily constructed in a swampy, mosquito-infested area, with none of the amenities afforded to white recruits at nearby Camp Lejeune. The barracks were rudimentary, the training facilities substandard, and the daily regimen designed to break both body and spirit. Black Marines were not allowed to enter Camp Lejeune unless accompanied by a white Marine. They were subjected to harassment from local civilians and military police alike. When they ventured into Jacksonville, the nearest town, they faced the familiar humiliations of Southern segregation, restaurants that wouldn't serve them, stores that wouldn't admit them, and the constant threat of violence if they were perceived as stepping out of their place. The first drill instructors at Montford Point were white, and many made no secret of their resentment at being assigned to train black recruits. They imposed punishing physical demands and arbitrary discipline, hoping to drive the black volunteers out of the Corps. What they didn't anticipate was the determination of men like Rhodes, who had spent their entire lives navigating systems designed to make them fail. By 1943, as more black Marines completed training, the Corps began appointing black drill instructors, including the legendary Gilbert Hashmark Johnson and Edgar Huff, whose demanding but fair leadership would shape a generation of Montford Point Marines. Despite these obstacles, Rhodes graduated as honor man of his platoon. His exceptional marksmanship and fieldcraft drew the attention of Captain Marcus Welby, a progressive-minded officer who had been tasked with identifying black Marines with specialized skills. In a rare exception to policy, Rhodes and 3 other Montford Point graduates were sent to Scout Sniper School at Camp Elliott in California. The decision was controversial, with several senior officers objecting to placing black Marines in roles that would require them to operate independently and make critical decisions without direct supervision from white officers. "The first day at sniper school, a white sergeant told us we had no business being there," recalled Lawrence Jenkins, one of the other black Marines selected for the program. Rhodes just looked at him cool as ice and said, "Sir, I'm here to learn how to kill enemies of the United States. If you can help with that, I'm listening. If not, I'll find someone who will." That shut him up quick. By the 3rd week, Rhodes was outperforming everyone, and that same sergeant was asking him for advice on stalking techniques. The curriculum at Scout Sniper School was intensely challenging, designed to eliminate all but the most capable candidates. It combined precision marksmanship, advanced fieldcraft, map reading, terrain analysis, and tactical decision-making. The attrition rate among white trainees was approximately 70%. For the 4 black Marines, it was understood that a single failure would reflect on all African Americans in the Corps and potentially close this pathway for future black Marines. Rhodes thrived under this pressure. His years of hunting in the Carolina woods translated seamlessly to military stalking techniques. His mathematical aptitude allowed him to calculate range, wind drift, and bullet drop with unusual precision, and his lifelong experience of navigating white society had made him adept at reading subtle behavioral cues, a skill that proved invaluable in predicting enemy movements and detecting camouflaged positions. Rhodes mastered the Springfield M1903 bolt-action rifle with a Unertl scope, learning to hit targets at ranges exceeding 800 yards. But what truly distinguished him was his innovative approach to fieldcraft. While other snipers relied on standard techniques, Rhodes incorporated methods he'd learned from his grandfather, using local materials to break up his silhouette, moving with the natural rhythms of the environment, and applying mathematics to predict the movement patterns of his quarry. Most fellows tried to disappear completely, which works fine until you need to move, explained Jenkins. Rhodes had a different approach. He'd study how light and shadow naturally shifted in an area, then time his movements to coincide with those changes. He called it hiding in plain sight. The instructors couldn't figure out how he was covering ground without being spotted. By the time he graduated from Scout Sniper School in early 1943, Rhodes had earned the reluctant respect of the instructors and his fellow students. Captain Welby, who had championed the integration experiment, received reports that Rhodes had set new course records for long-distance target acquisition and infiltration exercises. However, despite these achievements, the Marine Corps remained uncertain about how to employ black snipers in combat operations. Initially, there was talk of assigning Rhodes and the other black graduates to training roles, keeping them safely away from the front lines where their presence might complicate unit cohesion. But as casualties mounted in the Pacific and the need for skilled scout snipers grew more acute, pragmatism began to outweigh prejudice. By mid-1943, the decision was made to deploy Rhodes and selected other black specialists to combat zones, albeit under carefully controlled conditions. By the time he deployed to the Pacific in late 1943, Staff Sergeant Rhodes had earned a reputation as an unconventional but highly effective operator. Initially assigned to the intelligence section of the 4th Marine Division, he soon found himself leading a mixed scout sniper team, one of the first integrated combat units in Marine Corps history, though this fact was carefully omitted from official records. This arrangement was presented as a temporary expedient rather than a permanent policy change, allowing the Marine Corps to utilize Rhodes's skills without formally acknowledging the success of integration. His team included Marines who, for various reasons, didn't fit neatly into the Corps' rigid hierarchy. There was Jenkins, another Montford Point graduate whose quick wit and steady hands made him an excellent spotter. Corporal Daniel Kowalski, a Polish-American radioman whose accent had made him an outsider in his original unit. Sergeant Miguel Vasquez, a Mexican-American from Texas whose intimate knowledge of night operations stemmed from years working on his family's ranch. And Private First Class Thomas Walking Bear, a Lakota from South Dakota whose tracking skills rivaled Rhodes's own. Together they formed a unit that reflected America's diversity far more accurately than most military formations of the era. We were the misfits, Kowalski would later recall, but Rhodes had a way of turning our differences into advantages. He'd say, "The Corps wants us all to think alike, but the enemy thinks alike too. Our job is to surprise them, and you can't do that by being predictable." Rhodes saw his first combat on Roy Namur in the Marshall Islands campaign of January 1944. His unit was tasked with eliminating Japanese observation posts ahead of the main landing. Over 3 tense days, Rhodes and his team neutralized 17 enemy positions without taking a single casualty, providing critical intelligence that shaped the battle plan. "He moved like a shadow," said Corporal Kowalski. "The Japanese never knew he was there until it was too late, and he had this way of reading terrain that was almost supernatural. He could look at a stretch of beach or jungle and tell you exactly where the enemy would be positioned, like he could see through their eyes." The operation on Roy Namur established a pattern that would define Rhodes's approach throughout the Pacific Campaign. Rather than employing textbook tactics, he adapted his methods to local conditions and enemy behaviors. On one occasion, noting that Japanese sentries were more vigilant at the top of each hour, he timed his team's movements for the middle periods when attention naturally flagged. On another, he used tidal patterns to mask the sounds of his team's approach, moving during the rhythmic crash of waves against the shoreline. After the successful Marshall's Campaign, Rhodes earned a Navy Cross for his actions on Saipan, where he crawled across 200 yards of open ground under heavy fire to rescue 3 wounded Marines. The citation noted his extraordinary heroism and conspicuous devotion to duty, though newspapers back home barely mentioned the decoration when reporting on the battle. The official photograph accompanying the award showed only the medal itself, not the Black Marine who had earned it, a telling omission that reflected the military's ambivalence about celebrating African-American heroism. Throughout this period, Rhodes maintained a meticulous journal documenting both tactical lessons and his experiences as a Black Marine in a segregated military. These writings, discovered decades later among his personal effects, provide a unique window into the complex reality of fighting for a country that denied him full citizenship. "Strange to risk my life for a democracy I can't fully participate in," he wrote after one particularly harrowing mission. "Yet I fight without reservation because the America that could be is worth defending, even if the America that is hasn't made up its mind about me." By June 1944, Rhodes had been appointed to lead a special reconnaissance section within the Scout Sniper Platoon, a position virtually unheard of for a Black Marine at that time. His 20-man team included several Native Americans, a Mexican-American, and a Japanese-American linguist, a truly diverse unit that reflected Rhodes's belief that talent and trust mattered more than background. This appointment came not through official channels promoting integration, but through the pragmatic recognition by field commanders that Rhodes consistently produced results that saved American lives. "Rhodes didn't care where you came from," said Sergeant Miguel Vasquez, one of his squad leaders. "He only cared about whether you could shoot straight, move silently, and think on your feet. He said we were all the same color in the dark, and the Japanese bullets didn't discriminate, so why should we?" This unconventional attitude would prove crucial in the days to come, as Rhodes and his men prepared to play their part in one of the most significant campaigns of the Pacific War, the invasion of Saipan. The assault on the Marianas began on June 15, 1944, with simultaneous attacks on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. This operation, codenamed Forager, represented a major strategic thrust toward the Japanese homeland. The islands would provide crucial airfields within bombing range of Japan itself, and their capture would cut off Japanese forces in the Central Pacific from their bases in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. American planners referred to Saipan as the key to Japan, recognizing that its capture would fundamentally alter the strategic balance in the Pacific. For the Japanese, the Marianas represented an inner defensive line that could not be breached. Emperor Hirohito himself declared that the islands must be held at all costs. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding Japanese forces on Saipan, ordered his 30,000 troops to fight to the death. "Whether we attack or whether we stay where we are, there is only death," Saito told his men. "However, in death, there is life. We must use this opportunity to exalt true Japanese manhood." The defense of Saipan was meticulous and comprehensive. The Japanese had spent months fortifying natural caves, constructing concrete bunkers, and positioning artillery to cover likely landing zones. They had studied American amphibious tactics from earlier campaigns and prepared countermeasures for each phase of the expected assault. Underwater obstacles and mines were placed offshore to damage landing craft. Mortars and machine guns were pre-registered on the beaches to create interlocking fields of fire. Tank ditches and anti-tank guns were positioned to counter American armor. The entire island had been transformed into a defensive stronghold that would extract a heavy price from any attacking force. Against this determined defense, the Americans committed the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, followed by the 27th Infantry Division. The landings on Saipan's west coast met fierce resistance from the beginning. Japanese artillery and mortar fire, pre-registered on the beaches, caused heavy casualties among the first waves. Underwater demolition teams had cleared some obstacles, but many remained to tear open the bottoms of landing craft. Marines waiting ashore faced a gauntlet of machine gun fire that churned the water red. By nightfall on June 15th, the Marines had established a tenuous beachhead, but at a cost of 2,000 casualties. The terrain of Saipan presented a complex challenge for American forces. The island featured a diverse landscape including sugarcane fields, steep ridges, coastal swamps, and dense jungle patches. The northern half was dominated by Mount Tapochau, a rugged 3,000-foot peak that provided the Japanese with excellent observation and firing positions overlooking the entire battlefield. The southern portion, where the Americans landed, contained a mix of flat agricultural land, intersected by drainage ditches and low hills fortified as defensive strong points. For the Marines, this varied terrain required constant tactical adjustments. Units trained primarily for beach assaults now faced urban combat in Garapan, the island's main town, and mountain warfare in the central ridges. The fields of sugar cane, standing 7 to 10 feet tall, created natural ambush zones where Japanese infiltrators could hide within yards of American positions, emerging at night to attack with grenades and bayonets. The caves and ravines that dotted the island became fortresses that had to be reduced one by one, often at great cost. Over the next week, the Americans pushed inland against increasingly desperate Japanese resistance. The terrain of Saipan, a mix of sugarcane fields, dense jungle, and craggy volcanic ridges, favored the defenders. Japanese soldiers fought from caves and bunkers, often holding out until killed or committing suicide rather than surrendering. The concept of surrender was so alien to the Japanese military ethos that many defenders chose ritual suicide over capture, creating a psychological barrier that American forces struggled to overcome. The fighting was often at point-blank range, with Japanese infiltrators penetrating American lines at night to attack sleeping Marines with knives and grenades. The sound of Japanese voices calling out in broken English, "Marine, you die," became a dreaded feature of the night battles. American flamethrowers and demolition charges became essential tools for clearing bunkers and caves, terrible weapons for a terrible kind of war where quarter was neither offered nor expected. By June 22nd, the Marines had captured Osleto Airfield in the south and were pressing northward against stiffening resistance. Intelligence reports indicated that the Japanese were preparing for a massive counterattack, gambling their remaining armor and infantry in a last-ditch effort to push the Americans back into the sea. Lieutenant General Saito, recognizing that his defensive strategy was failing, had decided to concentrate his forces for a decisive blow rather than continue the war of attrition that was slowly consuming his command. The intelligence section at 4th Marine Division headquarters had detected unusual movement behind Japanese lines. Columns of troops and vehicles shifting position under cover of darkness, supplies being consolidated, and forward units pulling back to new assembly areas. These signs pointed to a major operation in preparation, but the exact timing and direction of the expected assault remained unclear. What was needed was eyes on the ground, deep in enemy territory, to pinpoint the Japanese attack force before it could be unleashed against vulnerable American positions. It was against this backdrop that Staff Sergeant Rhodes and his Scout Sniper section received orders to penetrate Japanese lines and gather intelligence on enemy movements and defensive positions along the east coast of the island. What was supposed to be a 48-hour mission would stretch into 5 days of constant danger as Rhodes and his men found themselves behind enemy lines during the largest Japanese counterattack of the campaign. Colonel Raymond Morris, commanding the 23rd Marines, personally briefed Rhodes on the mission. "We need to know what's happening on the other side of those ridges," he explained, pointing to a map of Saipan's eastern coastline. "Aerial reconnaissance shows vehicle movement at night, but we can't tell if they're reinforcing or withdrawing. I need ground-level intelligence, troop concentrations, armor positions, assembly areas. This information could save hundreds of lives if the Japanese are planning what we think they are." Rhodes studied the map, noting the rugged terrain his team would need to traverse and the likely Japanese security measures they would encounter. "We'll need to move light and fast," he said. 2 days behind their lines, then back with the intelligence before they know we were there." Morris nodded. "This is strictly volunteer. The risk level is extreme." "My men will go where I go, sir," Rhodes replied simply, "and I go where I'm needed." The 19 Marines moved out before dawn on June 23rd, slipping through gaps in the American front lines and infiltrating Japanese territory. Traveling in two-man teams spaced 20 yards apart, they used hand signals and bird calls to maintain contact while minimizing the risk of detection. Rhodes had carefully studied Japanese patrol patterns from previous reconnaissance reports, identifying a seam between two enemy units where security was likely to be thinnest. For 2 days, they gathered critical intelligence, noting troop concentrations, command posts, and artillery positions. Each observation was meticulously recorded in Rhodes's notebook using a shorthand code he had developed. Locations were marked on a waterproof map with annotations indicating unit size, equipment types, and apparent readiness level. The team avoided contact with the enemy whenever possible, though on 2 occasions Rhodes's marksmen were forced to silently eliminate Japanese sentries who stumbled upon their position. On the morning of June 25th, they observed a column of Japanese tanks moving south along a narrow coastal road, a movement that hadn't been anticipated by American intelligence. The Type 95 light tanks, distinguished by their boxy turrets and distinctive engine sound, were moving in column formation with infantry support, clearly preparing for offensive operations rather than defensive positioning. "Something big is brewing," Rhodes told his radio man, Corporal Kowalski. "They're concentrating armor for a counterattack. We need to get this information back to division." But as they attempted to return to American lines that afternoon, they found their path blocked by newly established Japanese defensive positions. Forced to detour through increasingly difficult terrain, the Scout Sniper team found themselves in a precarious position as darkness fell on June 25th. The planned 48-hour mission had already stretched to 72 hours, and their supplies of water and ammunition were running dangerously low. It was then that they encountered the tank column that would change the course of the battle. The situation facing Rhodes and his men on that humid evening of June 25th was dire. 6 Japanese Type 95 tanks had halted along the narrow jungle road, their commanders conferring over maps. Behind them, Rhodes could see trucks carrying infantry, at least a company strength. This was clearly an element of the counterattack force, moving into position for the following morning's assault. The Japanese voices carried clearly in the still evening air, and though Rhodes couldn't understand the language, the tone suggested confidence, even eagerness for the coming battle. Through his binoculars, Rhodes studied the tank commanders as they clustered around a map spread on the hood of a truck. Their animated gestures and frequent pointing toward the west confirmed his suspicion. They were plotting a route to strike the American flank. If this force managed to break through, it could roll up the entire Marine line from the side, potentially turning the battle in Japan's favor. The Japanese tanks were positioned in single file along the road with dense jungle on both sides, preventing them from deploying into a more tactical formation. It was a vulnerable position. If they could be engaged from the flank, they would have difficulty maneuvering to respond. But Rhodes and his 19 Marines lacked the heavy weapons needed to tackle armor. Between them, they had 7 Springfield sniper rifles, 8 M1 Garands, 4 Thompson submachine guns, and a handful of grenades. Not a single bazooka or other anti-tank weapon. "Sir, we need to pull back and report this," whispered Sergeant Vasquez. "We can't take on tanks." Rhodes nodded, but his eyes never left the Japanese column. He had been studying their movements, noting how the tank commanders kept referring to their maps and compasses as they plotted their route. The lead commander, identifiable by his officer's cap and authoritative gestures, seemed to be having difficulty reconciling his map with the actual terrain. Rhodes understood the problem. Saipan's interior was a maze of unmarked trails, ravines, and ridge lines that didn't appear on standard maps. The Japanese were trying to plan a night movement through unfamiliar territory, a challenging proposition under the best of circumstances. An idea began to form, wild, dangerous, but potentially effective. Rhodes reached into his pocket and pulled out the broken compass, its cracked face catching the fading light. Since being damaged on Guadalcanal, the compass had developed an unusual property. Instead of pointing reliably to magnetic north, the needle was strongly attracted to large metal objects. Rhodes had kept it as a curiosity, occasionally using it to detect hidden weapons caches by noting the needle's deflection when passed over suspected hiding spots. Now, as he watched the Japanese officers consulting their own compasses to orient their maps, Rhodes saw a possibility that no training manual had ever covered. "Radio regiment," he told Kowalski quietly. "Tell them we've located a Japanese armored column preparing to attack Sector 4. 6 tanks plus infantry support, approximately 1 company strength. Request immediate artillery support on these coordinates." While Kowalski made the transmission, Rhodes gathered his team leaders. "I have a plan," he said, pulling out his broken compass. "We can't destroy those tanks ourselves, but we can make them destroy each other." The plan Rhodes outlined was audacious. Using the broken compass, which was attracted to large metal objects, they would create false trail markers that would lead the Japanese tanks into a natural ambush position, a narrow ravine where American artillery could target them precisely. But first, they needed to eliminate the tank commanders who were currently consulting their maps and working out the correct route. "I need our best shots," Rhodes said. "On my signal, we take out all 6 tank commanders simultaneously. The rest of you prepare false trail markers with phosphorescent moss tied to stakes. We'll plant them along the route leading to Kill Zone Baker." Kill Zone Baker was the military designation for a steep-sided ravine that Rhodes had noted on their maps earlier that day. It was approximately 2 miles east of the American front lines, within range of American artillery positions, and provided no escape routes for vehicles once they entered. The ravine's high walls would contain the blast effects of artillery shells, maximizing their destructive power, while the narrow floor would prevent the tanks from dispersing or maneuvering to avoid incoming fire. "Sir, with respect, this is crazy," Sergeant Vasquez said. "Even if we take out the commanders, they'll have replacements. And why would they follow our markers?" Rhodes held up the broken compass. "Because in the dark, they won't know which way is north. We eliminate their guides and their navigational tools, then we give them a path that seems to lead where they want to go. They're in a hurry to get into position before dawn. They'll take what looks like the most direct route." He explained that Japanese tank units in the Pacific often relied heavily on their officers for navigation, especially in unfamiliar terrain. The hierarchical nature of their military culture discouraged initiative among lower ranks, who were expected to follow orders rather than adapt to changing circumstances. By removing the commanders and creating a plausible alternative route, they could exploit this rigid command structure. "The Japanese train to execute orders precisely," Rhodes continued. "They don't improvise well when plans go awry. If we can eliminate the officers who know the original route and provide what looks like an existing trail, they'll follow it without question. Their doctrine emphasizes maintaining schedule above all. They'll press forward rather than delay the operation by seeking alternative paths. It was a gamble, but with no good alternatives, the Marines prepared to execute Rhodes's plan. The snipers moved into position, each assigned a specific tank commander target. The rest of the team gathered phosphorescent fungi from rotting logs, the same natural material that Japanese soldiers sometimes used to mark trails for night movement. This bioluminescent moss gave off a soft, greenish glow that was visible in darkness but wouldn't attract attention from a distance. It was ideal for their purpose. Rhodes calculated the firing solution carefully. The Japanese officers were approximately 200 yards away, a challenging but manageable distance for skilled marksmen. The fading light would make the shots more difficult, but it also meant the Japanese would have less visibility to spot the muzzle flashes. The plan required all 6 commanders to be eliminated simultaneously to prevent any warning shouts or radio transmissions. "On my mark," Rhodes whispered into the radio. 3, 2, 1. At Rhodes's signal, 7 shots cracked through the humid air in near unison. 5 of the 6 Japanese tank commanders fell instantly. The 6th was wounded, but managed to drop into his turret before a follow-up shot could find him. The precision of the volley spoke to the countless hours of training and the natural talent of Rhodes's hand-picked team. Even in the failing light, with targets moving unpredictably, they had achieved an extraordinary kill ratio. Chaos erupted as the Japanese infantry scattered for cover, firing blindly into the jungle. The tanks buttoned up, their machine guns spraying the vegetation with suppressive fire, but they couldn't see their attackers, who had already begun withdrawing according to Rhodes's plan. The Japanese response was predictable, establishing a defensive perimeter and awaiting orders from officers who were now dead or dying. This momentary paralysis gave Rhodes's team the opening they needed. Working in 2-man teams, the Marines rapidly established the false trail, placing luminescent markers at regular intervals leading toward the ravine. Rhodes used his broken compass to ensure the markers would appear convincing to disoriented tank crews operating in near darkness. The precise spacing and alignment of the markers, calculated using principles of perspective and night vision limitations, made the false route appear to be the correct path of advance. Each marker was positioned to be visible only from the direction of approach, creating the illusion of a continuous trail while minimizing the chance of detection from other angles. "Remember," Rhodes instructed, "we're not creating a new path. We're making them think this is their original route. Make it look official. Use the same spacing their own engineers would use." The team worked with practiced efficiency, completing the task in under 30 minutes. By then, the Japanese had begun to reorganize under the leadership of junior officers and non-commissioned officers. The sound of tank engines revving indicated they were preparing to resume their advance, despite the loss of their commanders. The mission timeline hadn't been abandoned, just as Rhodes had predicted. With the markers in place, Rhodes and his team slipped away through the jungle, moving parallel to the route they'd established. Their goal was to reach American lines ahead of the Japanese column and prepare the artillery ambush that would be the killing stroke of their plan. The night had fully descended now, making movement through the dense vegetation treacherous. But each man knew that the lives of countless fellow Marines depended on their speed and silence. "It's going to work," Rhodes told Kowalski as they moved swiftly through the darkness. Japanese tank doctrine emphasizes rigid adherence to planned routes and timetables. With their commanders eliminated and their primary navigation compromised, they'll follow the clearest path available, our path. The team moved in a staggered column, maintaining 5-yard intervals to minimize the risk of multiple casualties from a single explosion in case they triggered any Japanese mines or booby traps. Rhodes led from the middle of the formation rather than the front, a technique he had developed to maintain better control of the unit in low visibility conditions. Hand signals and bird calls continued to be their primary means of communication, with radio silence maintained except for the most urgent messages. By midnight, the scout sniper team had reached the forward American positions where they were initially mistaken for Japanese infiltrators until Rhodes called out the day's recognition signal. Once through the lines, they immediately reported to the regimental command post. The hastily established CP was housed in a captured Japanese bunker, its walls lined with maps and communication equipment. The air inside was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of coffee that had been reheated too many times. Colonel Raymond Morris, the regimental commander, was initially skeptical of Rhodes' plan. "You're telling me you led an entire Japanese tank company into a ravine using glow-in-the-dark mushrooms?" "Not yet, sir," Rhodes replied calmly, "but they'll be there within the hour if you can have artillery standing by." The colonel studied the map where Rhodes had marked the ravine. "That's a perfect kill zone," he admitted, "if they actually follow your trail." "They will, sir," Rhodes said with quiet confidence. Their original route would have brought them directly into the flank of Baker Company at dawn. This way, we eliminate their armor before they can launch their attack. Morris weighed the options. Committing artillery assets based on such an unorthodox plan carried risks. Those same guns might be needed elsewhere if the Japanese attack materialized along a different axis. But the precision of Rhodes's intelligence and the detailed nature of his observations lent credibility to his assessment. After a moment's consideration, the colonel made his decision. "I'll have artillery ready to fire on your coordinates, but I want confirmation when those tanks enter the ravine." Rhodes and 3 of his men immediately headed back toward the Japanese lines, taking up observation positions overlooking Kill Zone Baker. The rest of the team remained at the command post to help coordinate the artillery strike. This final phase of the operation was perhaps the most dangerous, positioning themselves close enough to observe the Japanese column, but far enough away to avoid the impending artillery barrage. The observation post Rhodes selected was a rocky outcropping that provided a clear line of sight to the ravine entrance, while offering good cover from both Japanese patrols and American shells. The 4 Marines settled into position, their camouflage blending seamlessly with the surrounding vegetation. Through his binoculars, Rhodes could see the faint glow of their phosphorescent markers leading into the mouth of the ravine like a runway of ghostly lights. The wait seemed interminable. Had the Japanese discovered the ruse? Had they brought up engineering teams to clear alternate routes? As the minutes ticked by, doubt began to creep in. Rhodes checked his watch. Nearly an hour had passed since they'd reached American lines. The Japanese should have reached the ravine entrance by now if they were following the false trail. Then, at approximately 01:15 hours, the distinctive rumble of tank engines echoed through the night. Through his binoculars, Rhodes could make out the lead Type 95 entering the mouth of the ravine, following the phosphorescent markers exactly as he had predicted. The tank's silhouette was unmistakable, squat and angular, with its main gun traversed forward in anticipation of combat. Behind it, a column of vehicles stretched back into the darkness, each following the one ahead in a perfect line. One by one, the remaining 5 tanks followed, accompanied by trucks carrying infantry. The Japanese were moving cautiously but steadily, maintaining proper intervals between vehicles. Their discipline was impressive, even as it led them directly into the trap Rhodes had laid. By 01:30, the entire column had entered the ravine, creating a tightly packed target for the waiting American artillery. Rhodes keyed his radio. "Checkmate, this is Scout Actual. Targets are entering the kill zone now. Count 6 tanks plus 4 troop carriers. Over." "Scout Actual, this is Checkmate. Artillery is ready. Confirmed targets are in position. Over." Rhodes watched as the last vehicle entered the ravine. The Japanese column was now perfectly positioned, with steep walls on either side preventing escape. The lead tank had nearly reached the far end of the ravine, while the rear elements were just clearing the entrance, a linear target approximately 200 yards in length. "Checkmate, all targets are in the kill zone. Fire for effect. Over." "Roger, Scout Actual. Fire mission incoming. Suggest you take cover. Over." Rhodes and his observation team barely had time to duck behind a ridge when the world seemed to explode. The coordinated artillery barrage 12 105mm howitzers firing at once dropped precise concentrations directly into the ravine. The initial impacts destroyed the lead and rear tanks, trapping the column. Subsequent salvos methodically demolished the remaining vehicles. The sound was deafening, a continuous thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Bright flashes illuminated the night, briefly turning darkness into a harsh, unnatural day. Secondary explosions indicated ammunition cooking off as the Japanese tanks were hit. Through his binoculars, Rhodes could see figures scrambling from the burning vehicles, only to be cut down by shrapnel from the next artillery volley. The Japanese infantry, caught in the open, suffered catastrophic casualties. A few attempted to climb the ravine walls but were cut down by Rhodes' snipers. Within 15 minutes, the entire enemy force had been neutralized, with no survivors apparent. What had been a potent attack force capable of inflicting hundreds of American casualties was now a smoking ruin of twisted metal and broken bodies. As dawn broke over Saipan on June 26th, reconnaissance patrols confirmed the destruction. All 6 tanks and their supporting infantry, approximately 180 men, had been eliminated. More significantly, captured documents revealed that this force had been the advance element of a much larger counterattack planned for that morning. With their spearhead destroyed and their plans compromised, the Japanese commanders were forced to delay and reconfigure their assault, giving American forces crucial time to strengthen their positions. The main Japanese attack, when it finally came on July 7th, was a massive but disorganized banzai charge rather than the coordinated armor infantry assault originally planned. While this final desperate effort temporarily overwhelmed some American positions, it ultimately resulted in the virtual annihilation of the remaining Japanese forces on Saipan. The absence of armor support, tanks that had been destroyed in Rhodes's ravine, meant that the Japanese infantry had to cross open ground without protection, suffering horrific casualties in the process. Colonel Morris personally debriefed Rhodes and his team later that day. "That was the most unorthodox tactic I've seen in 20 years of service," he told them, "but damn if it didn't work perfectly." "You saved a lot of Marine lives today, Staff Sergeant." For Rhodes, the broken compass trick represented something deeper than just tactical innovation. It symbolized his approach to the prejudice and limitations he had faced throughout his life and military career. The compass had been written off as useless because it no longer functioned as designed, just as Black Americans were often dismissed based on preconceptions rather than actual capabilities. But by understanding how the damaged instrument actually worked, rather than how it was supposed to work, Rhodes had turned a liability into an advantage. "Sometimes what appears broken is just working differently," he would later explain to a war correspondent. "My compass didn't point north anymore, but it still had a purpose if you understood how it worked now, rather than how it was supposed to work. A lot of people look at something unexpected and dismiss it. I've always tried to see the potential instead." The Battle of Saipan would rage for another 3 weeks, culminating in a massive final Japanese banzai charge on July 7th that nearly overwhelmed American positions before being defeated at tremendous cost to both sides. By the time the island was declared secure on July 9th, over 3,000 Americans had been killed and over 10,000 wounded. Japanese losses were even more staggering, almost 30,000 dead, with only a few hundred taken prisoner. Throughout the remainder of the campaign, Rhodes and his scout sniper team continued to provide valuable intelligence and precision fire support. Their unorthodox tactics and diverse composition remained an anomaly in the still segregated military, but their effectiveness earned them increasing autonomy and respect. Field commanders, concerned primarily with results rather than racial protocols, often requested Rhodes' team specifically for high-priority missions. After Saipan, Rhodes served on Tinian and Iwo Jima, where his team helped locate and eliminate Japanese artillery positions that were inflicting heavy casualties on landing Marines. His methods continued to evolve, incorporating lessons learned in each engagement and adapting to the changing nature of the Pacific War. On Iwo Jima, he pioneered the use of false fire techniques, having his snipers intentionally miss their first shots to draw enemy reaction, revealing hidden positions that could then be targeted precisely. By the war's end, he had been awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts in addition to his Navy Cross. His citation for the Silver Star, earned on Iwo Jima, noted his exceptional tactical innovation and conspicuous gallantry, a rare acknowledgment of both his courage and his intellectual contribution to Marine Corps operations. Yet despite this distinguished combat record, Rhodes's contributions remained largely unrecognized in public accounts of the Pacific Campaign. When Life magazine published a feature on Marine scout snipers in 1945, not a single photograph included Black Marines, though by that time several had served with distinction in these elite units. When Hollywood produced films about the island-hopping campaign, the faces on screen were uniformly white, creating a historical record that erased the diversity that had actually existed in units like Rhodes's team. Despite his exemplary service record, Rhodes returned to a United States still firmly in the grip of segregation. When his troop transport docked in San Francisco in December 1945, he was directed to separate colored debarkation facilities. The Welcome Home Parade in his hometown featured the local white veterans prominently, while black veterans were acknowledged almost as an afterthought, marching at the rear of the procession despite their equal sacrifices. When he tried to use his GI Bill benefits to attend engineering school in North Carolina, he was redirected to a colored technical college with inferior facilities and limited curriculum. The doors that should have opened based on his military achievements remained largely closed because of his race. The irony was not lost on Rhodes. He had helped defeat fascism abroad, only to face a different kind of discrimination at home. Undeterred, Rhodes leveraged his mechanical aptitude and leadership skills to establish a successful automotive repair business in Durham. He hired fellow black veterans, creating opportunities when most businesses wouldn't. His shop became known for taking on jobs others deemed too complicated or impossible to fix, a reflection of the problem-solving approach that had served him so well during the war. By the early 1950s, Rhodes Precision Automotive had grown from a one-man operation to a respected business employing 15 people. Rhodes applied the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his military service, keeping immaculate records and investing in the latest diagnostic equipment. When other shops turned away customers with unusual mechanical problems, Rhodes welcomed the challenge, often developing innovative repair techniques that others later adopted. His reputation for honesty and technical excellence gradually transcended racial boundaries, and by the mid-1950s, his customer base included white professionals and business owners alongside his core black clientele. This economic success allowed him to purchase a home in a better neighborhood, though still within the confines of Durham's segregated housing pattern, and to ensure that his children received educational opportunities he had been denied. In 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the armed forces. The Montford Point training facility was closed in 1949, marking the end of official segregation in the Marine Corps. Many of the tactics developed by Rhodes and other scout snipers during the Pacific campaigns were incorporated into formal Marine Corps doctrine, though often without attribution to their originators. Rhodes maintained contact with several members of his wartime team, including Vasquez and Kowalski, who had remained lifelong friends despite the social pressures of the era. They would gather annually to commemorate their shared experiences and to honor those who hadn't returned. These reunions, initially held in private homes due to segregation laws that prohibited mixed-race gatherings in public establishments, later expanded to include other veterans and eventually their families. At these gatherings, Rhodes would sometimes bring out the broken compass that had played such a crucial role on Saipan. The simple instrument, with its cracked glass and misdirected needle, became a tangible link to their shared past and a symbol of how unexpected solutions could emerge from apparent failure. He would pass it around the circle, allowing each man to hold this piece of history that had never appeared in any official account, but had changed the course of a battle and saved countless lives. Rhodes rarely spoke publicly about his wartime experiences, preferring to focus on building his business and raising his family. But in private, he shared stories with his children and later his grandchildren, instilling in them the same values that had guided him through war and peace: resilience, innovation, excellence, and dignity in the face of adversity. He emphasized education as the key to advancement, proudly watching as all three of his children earned college degrees, opportunities that had been denied to him despite his military service. For decades, the contributions of the Montford Point Marines remained largely unrecognized in official histories. The narrative of World War II that emerged in textbooks and popular culture focused primarily on white servicemen, with only occasional mention of segregated units like the Tuskegee Airmen. The integration of the armed forces after 1948 was presented as a benevolent policy change rather than a recognition of the proven capabilities of black service members like Rhodes. It wasn't until the 21st century that their legacy began to receive proper acknowledgement. In 2012, the surviving Montford Point Marines were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of their service and sacrifice. The citation noted that they had served with honor and distinction despite discrimination, and had helped pave the way for desegregation of the military. Of the approximately 20,000 black Marines who trained at Montford Point between 1942 and 1949, fewer than 400 were still alive to receive this long overdue recognition. Ellington Rhodes didn't live to see this recognition. He passed away in 1983 at the age of 66, leaving behind a successful business, 3 children, all college graduates, and 8 grandchildren. His funeral was attended by several members of his old Scout Sniper team, including Miguel Vasquez and Daniel Kowalski, who had remained lifelong friends despite the social pressures of the era. He never complained about the way the country treated him after the war, Kowalski recalled at the funeral. He just kept moving forward, finding paths where others saw barriers. That was Rhodes, always looking for a way through rather than dwelling on what stood in his way. Among Rhodes's personal effects was the broken compass that had played such a crucial role on Saipan. His son, James Rhodes, donated it to the National Museum of the Marine Corps, where it is now displayed alongside other artifacts from the Pacific War. The accompanying placard describes how a resourceful Marine scout sniper used an unconventional technique to lead enemy tanks into an ambush position, but makes no mention of the fact that this innovative Marine was African American. The omission is perhaps fitting. Rhodes had never sought recognition based on his race, preferring to be judged solely on his actions and abilities. Perhaps the most telling tribute came from Colonel Morris, who had risen to the rank of Major General by the time of his retirement. In his unpublished memoirs, completed shortly before his death in 1971, he wrote, "Of all the Marines I commanded during my career, none exemplified our core values more completely than Staff Sergeant Ellington Rhodes. His tactical brilliance saved countless American lives, but it was his moral courage that most impressed me. In an era when men of his race were afforded few opportunities and little respect, he served with a dignity and professionalism that should have shamed those who doubted the capabilities of black Americans." The broken compass incident on Saipan wasn't just a clever trick. It was a metaphor for how Rhodes navigated a prejudiced world. When conventional paths were blocked, he found another way forward. Morris had recommended Rhodes for an officer's commission after Saipan, but the recommendation was quietly shelved by higher headquarters. The Marine Corps, which had reluctantly accepted black enlisted men, was not yet ready for black officers. Frederick C. Branch would not become the first black Marine officer until November 1945, and even then, his opportunities for command would be severely limited by persistent racial barriers. In recent years, military historians have begun to reassess the contributions of African American service members during World War II, bringing long overdue recognition to units like the Tuskegee Airmen, the 761st Tank Battalion, and the Montford Point Marines. These men served a country that often treated them as second-class citizens, fighting for freedoms abroad that they themselves were denied at home. Their patriotism and sacrifice, maintained despite this fundamental contradiction, represent a profound expression of faith in America's potential to live up to its stated ideals. The story of Staff Sergeant Ellington Rhodes and his broken compass represents more than just an innovative battlefield tactic. It reminds us that ingenuity can emerge from adversity, that leadership transcends racial boundaries, and that courage manifests in many forms, from facing enemy fire to challenging systemic prejudice with quiet dignity and excellence. It speaks to the resourcefulness born of necessity, the creativity that emerges when conventional tools and pathways are unavailable, and the determination to succeed despite institutional obstacles. Today, when visitors stop at the Montford Point Marines Memorial at Camp Lejeune, they see a simple inscription that encapsulates the legacy of men like Rhodes. Uncommon valor was a common virtue. These pioneers broke barriers and proved their worth in the crucible of combat, even when the country they served failed to recognize their full humanity. They demonstrated that excellence knows no color line, that innovation can emerge from the margins as readily as from the center, and that service to ideals larger than oneself can transcend even the most entrenched prejudices. The ravine on Saipan, where 6 Japanese tanks met their end that June night in 1944, bears no marker commemorating the innovative tactic that led them there. No plaque describes how a broken compass, in the hands of a Marine others might have underestimated, changed the course of a battle and saved hundreds of American lives. But perhaps that absence itself is fitting. Rhodes never sought recognition or acclaim. He simply did what needed to be done, using whatever tools were available, making a path forward where none seemed to exist. In the end, maybe that's the most important lesson from the story of the broken compass. When conventional wisdom fails, when the path ahead seems blocked, when the tools at hand appear inadequate to the task, that's precisely when innovation matters most. In war, as in life, it's not the perfection of our instruments that determines success, but rather our ability to adapt them to changing circumstances and unexpected challenges. It's the recognition that what others dismiss as broken may still have purpose if viewed from a different perspective. The legacy of Ellington Rhodes and the Montford Point Marines continues to resonate today, as America continues its unfinished journey toward true equality. Their story reminds us that progress often comes not through dramatic gestures, but through the quiet excellence of individuals who refuse to be limited by others' perceptions. It teaches us that leadership can emerge from unexpected quarters, that diversity strengthens rather than weakens our collective capabilities, and that the most effective solutions to complex problems often come from those who have learned to navigate both within and around established systems. Would you have thought to use a broken compass to change the course of a battle? Would you have seen opportunity where others saw only malfunction? Would you have persisted in serving a country that didn't fully recognize your humanity? These are the questions that the legacy of Ellington Rhodes and the Montford Point Marines continue to ask us today. They challenge us to look beyond conventional solutions, to value contribution over conformity, and to recognize that the path to innovation often begins with seeing possibility where others see only limitation. As we reflect on the heroes whose stories have been obscured by time and selective memory, we are reminded that courage takes many forms and emerges from all segments of society. The broken compass in Rhodes's hand was more than just a clever tactical tool. It was a symbol of the resilience and adaptability that allowed him and countless other marginalized Americans to navigate a world designed to exclude them. Their legacy isn't just about the battles they fought abroad, but about the barriers they broke at home, creating pathways for future generations to follow. Comment below and share this story so others remember what courage and innovation really mean, and how often they emerge from the most unexpected places and people.